Yo guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Jay's Garage. Today we are looking at the Bilstein 6112s and 5160s that I put on my 4th gen Ram 1500. Now, I no longer have this truck, but I did put over 10,000 miles on it before I recently got rid of it. I do have a new truck that you'll be seeing probably more of on the channel. Had that Ram for quite a while and it was time for something different. Hey, now real quick, I wanted to thank everybody that has subscribed to the channel. I know I'm just a small channel and I'm still finding my way with it all. But you guys showing your initial support and giving me the thumbs up and the subscribing to the channel, I greatly appreciate that. What is the Bilstein 6112 and 5160 shock package? So Bilstein makes a 5100 series shock package that's quite literally just the shocks. It does have a adjustable circlip for the front struts on any coilover suspension pickup truck. Those shocks are probably the cheapest and best way that you can improve the ride quality of your truck and change the front stance of the vehicle. Now, if you want something more than the 5100s, Bilstein has these 6112s and 5160s. They do come in more, of course, than that $400 entry-level 5100 system. These 6112s and 5160s run anywhere from about $1,000 to $1,400 right now, depending on where you buy it from. I'll tell you later in this video where I think you should buy it from. And keeping in mind, I have no affiliation with anybody at this time. So the 6112s and 5160s represent a tremendous value. And that is because the 6112 is basically a 2.6 inch body shock with a larger piston, higher oil capacity, just larger shaft diameter. All these things are much more significant than the entry-level 5100 system. It does use a similar digressive valving. I haven't used the 5100s myself, and so I can't tell you if they essentially ride the same on the road, but the 6112s do come with a Bilstein spring that's specific to the 6112 and to the truck that you're buying it for. Now out back you get the 5160s, and as far as I know, the 5160s are just a reservoir version of the 5100s. They tend to have a little bit more travel because of that reservoir, and they also have more shock oil to keep the shock cooler when you are demanding more from that suspension. So I'm gonna go ahead and let you know right off the bat, this suspension is excellent for people that are driving on the road. Even if you never off-road the truck, the 6112 and 5160 package, in my experience with it, is really great on the road. It's a significant upgrade over the stock suspension. Let's talk about the stock suspension for a little bit. On the Ram 1500, the suspension is super soft. It's easy to bottom out. The truck has quite a bit of body roll. I think the coil suspension on that truck certainly has pros and cons, and one of the advantages is the ride quality. But the stock shocks, they just don't do it for that truck. After putting the 6112s on the truck, I noticed that the suspension actually kept a good amount of initial plush, like comfort feeling in the suspension, but it seemed to pretty quickly ramp up the dampening capabilities when hitting bumps and taking turns, and pretty much doing anything with the suspension. So it's great that the suspension has that initial comfort that is going to satisfy, I would say, most people that own trucks, but it gets firm in the right ways where it just prevents the suspension from bottoming out too easily. I was talking about people that use it on the road. Well, you're likely to pull into rough parking lots, hit rough patches of pavement, going over speed bumps, all these things. The 6112s, 5160s, they handle that so great. When it came to speed bumps, I pretty much just drove over speed bumps. I didn't really worry about going over them slow. The suspension would just soak it up, and it would really tackle them in a very non-violent manner. Now, you can get the 6112s with 5100 rears and save yourself a little bit of money. And if you street drive most of the time and have no intentions of going off-road, that might be the path that you want to take. Bilstein intended the 6112 to go with the 5160, and I would say that that's a good pairing. The added reservoir will allow the 5160 to keep up with the 6112 when you're asking more of the suspension and heating up those shocks. So with the Ram 1500, I mostly drove the truck on the road. We like to, in the summertime, do some off-road beach driving, and out there conditions can get pretty rough on the suspension. It was very easy to to go over the washboards and bumps out there on the beach and just very quickly bottom out the stock suspension. Going out there with the 5160s, the truck felt much more sturdy. It felt more supported and was a lot harder to bottom out the suspension. And when the suspension did bottom out, it did it much more gracefully than the factory shocks ever did. Now, when you get the 6112s, not only do you get a bigger shock body, more shock oil and all that, you also get a new bump stop and you get a new spring that's tailored to that shock. That's something that you don't get with the 5100s, and I think that that's a noteworthy upgrade for the 6112s. The 5160s really don't cost that much more. They have the cool factor of being an external reservoir shock, and really they worked really good in my experience. I tow a 4-seat Razor Turbo R on a 7,000 pound car trailer, and combined it's somewhere around 4,500 pounds or more. And I know it's not a tremendous amount of weight, but the truck felt really good with the Bilstein suspension compared to the stock. I always thought that the stock was just a little too soft. The Bilstein keeps a good amount of comfort, but the truck just feels well supported. It doesn't body roll too much with or without a trailer. It feels nice and solid when it has a trailer. The suspension's not overly active. Also, I set this truck up on the 2-inch setting. There's a whole bunch of different circlip positions on this shock for the Ram 1500, anywhere from stock to 2.8 inches of claimed lift height. I went with what should have been a 2-inch option on my truck. Initially, after just putting some initial road miles on it, it settled into about like 3/4 of an inch of rake. But then right before I sold the truck at that 10,000 or so miles on the suspension mark, I measured the truck up again, and I actually had about 1.5 inches of rake. So the front springs did eventually settle more after putting some mileage on it. So something to consider. You might have to go a little nose high at first if you're ultimately looking for it to level out after the springs settle. I was probably going to leave it at this 2-inch setting. If I went any higher, I might have went ahead and got the Bilstein rear springs. They have a 1-inch lift rear spring. I liked the 2-inch setting. It didn't put the front end like crazy high. It might not be enough for some people, but it did get it up higher than stock, and it kept me a little bit of rake so that when I was pulling my trailer, I could keep the truck kind of level and not so squatty. These Rams, they squat real easy, and I didn't want to put a couple hundred pounds in the bed and have it automatically looking super squatty. So if you want to keep a little bit of capability in the truck, I recommend not going all the way up to the 2.8 setting. If you do require that maximum height and want the leveled look, definitely go to the 2.8 setting. And if you want maximum height, but you still want a little bit of rake, you might consider adding the Bilstein rear coil springs as well. Now, if you're putting these shocks on your truck, some things to consider is when you order them, it intends for you to use the upper coilover shock mount that you already have. So if you want to complete the coilovers before tearing apart your suspension, you'll need to order that upper shock mount. I went with KYB. And if your truck has any miles on it like mine did, mine was about 100,000 when I put these shocks on it. It was just a good idea to go ahead and get that new upper shock mount installed since you're putting fresh shocks on it anyways. I did go ahead. The instructions call for transferring over the dust boot after trimming it. I went ahead and ordered that and put it on. I really don't know how important that is to have on there, but the Bilstein instructions said to do it, so I just went ahead and followed along, took their recommendation. Now, if your truck has a whole bunch of miles on it, you might want to consider upgrading some other front end components along the way. I just went ahead and said screw it and went after the whole front end. I put fresh tie rod ends, sway bar end links. I just went ahead and ordered lower control arms for TRQ that had bushings and ball joint already installed. Those worked out excellent, by the way, if you don't want to mess around with pressing out the old ball joints and bushings and putting in new ones. And it's really not that much more expensive. I went with Zone upper control arms. I did do an initial review on these control arms, and I was a little hard on them. They did their job. They fit the truck good. They look pretty good overall. I thought that some of the welds weren't that great looking, but once it's on the truck, and especially on a level truck, you really don't see it all that much, so it's not that important. And the Zones are priced really nicely. They have replacement ball joints available, which I thought was very important. There are other, potentially cheaper upper control arms out there that just, you don't know what ball joints in them and what to put in there when it fails. And, I wouldn't want to have to buy a whole new upper control arm just because the ball joint eventually failed. So I think the Zone, the Bilstein says that you don't have to replace the upper control arm. You can use the factory upper control arm, the shock doesn't over travel the capabilities of that ball joint and that upper. But I went ahead and I wanted the suspension to be a little bit beefier, so I went ahead and did the upper control arms, and zones were a good value proposition for the quality that they offered, and they worked really good. Now, out back on the Ram, the factory control arms for the coil link suspension really isn't all that great, and I highly suggest swapping them out. Like 4 years ago, I put the Core 4x4 control arms on there. It's a bushing on one end and a Johnny joint on the other. Those control arms have been excellent for that suspension. They allow it to move nice and freely. They keep the axle hop completely under control, especially once you move away from the factory shock. When that truck was stock on the factory control arms and the factory shocks, it would axle hop something violently if I started spinning the rear tires. So if you want to keep that rear suspension under control and really reap the benefits of having a coil rear suspension, get yourself some aftermarket control arms. You're not going to regret it. Whether you're off-road or on-road, they're just going to give you better traction, no axle hop, and just keep the capability of the truck much higher. All right, guys, so from an upgrade standpoint, the Bilstein 6112s, 5160s, the zone upper control arms, and the Core 4x4 rear control arms, that all ran somewhere just over $2,000, like $2,200. And then if you do some of the other suspension upgrades, depending on if your truck has a lot of miles on it or not, you know, with your lower ball joint, lower control arm, stuff like that, you'll add a little bit more cost to it. But the way I look at it, spending about $2,200 is getting you a lot of suspension. You're getting an upgraded upper control arm, you're getting rear upgraded control arms to support the rear coil suspension, and you're getting a really good, there's a gnat in my eye, and you're getting a really good 6112 5160 combination that is just going to perform great on-road and off-road. If you're super hardcore about off-road, you'll probably want something more than the 6112, but for most of us, it gives you a really cool shock package that rides great and just has that good supported suspension feel that I think a pickup truck should have. Oh, real quick, I'm running a 275/65 R20 tire. That's a 34x11 on the factory 20-inch wheel. I'm not using any wheel spacer or anything. There was plenty of clearance with this tire and wheel combination to clear the aftermarket upper control arms. If you went with a wider tire, you could get into problems, but there was clearance, and I really like the way that just sticking with that tire size and wheel size worked out for the truck. Another thing too, these Cooper ATP 2s, super good tire for the money. If you need just a good all-around all-terrain that still looks pretty nice, check out the ATP 2. It has limited sizes. You get it at Discount Tire, but if it comes in the size that you want, especially that 275/65 20 in my case, I saved a lot of money compared to other brands, and I still got a good name brand tire that has like a 55 or 60K warranty on the tires. They work great in the rain. Just a good tire overall. Now, I have no affiliation with any of the shock stores out there, but Stage 3 Motorsports treated me really well with my Bilstein order, and they were cheaper than any other place as far as that shock package went for that truck. A lot of places are getting up to $1,400 for a 6112 and 5160 shock package right now, and you know, I paid $900 last year, and I think as of the date of me making this video, it's like $1,000 even for 6112 5160 package for a Ram 1500 4th gen like I have. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other places, and it doesn't really matter to me who you buy from. All right, guys, well, that's it for the 6112 5160 discussion on the Ram 1500. Like I say, I no longer have that truck, so I won't be making any more content for the Ram, unfortunately. I do have this new F-150 that I'll probably be talking about in a video to come, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, until the next video, guys, I'll see you around. Thanks for watching. Peace.